On my life's quest to teach you to be the best producer that you can be, I have to learn to be the best producer that I can be in order to get into the problems you run and develop solutions. In this video, I want to talk about the things that make me sound like a noob and solutions to those things. Effects too loud in the mix. I get myself into a very flow state when I'm writing tracks, and that's the problem. During this flow state, it's like I'm drinking a bunch of beer. My quality control goes down the drain. I start picking effects. I start layering effects weirdly. I start leveling them improperly. And the way that I fix it is simple. You want to lower down the master volume. You guys can lower down your interface volume, your big knob volume, turn some nipples. You want to get to a level where you're at talking volume. What it does is it brings the Fletcher-Munson curve, and the louder you hear something, the more balanced, the less change there is from your lows, let's say, to your highs. Versus if you hear at lower volumes, you can see your lows here, and then you got to go all the way down to get to your highs. So you're listening to a less balanced version of your song. Now, it's very important to listen at loud and quiet volumes because you want to make sure that if someone's listening to your volume and it's in the background while they're shopping for a new thong at Sephora, from there, you have a better sense of dynamics in your track. I can hear at this volume and make a better educated decision. Once I've set it somewhere where I think it sounds good, we want to go back up to max volume and make sure it sounds good there as well. If you find like, oh, it's too loud, I put it too loud or too quiet, don't change it more than 2 dB and move on. And I promise you that you will get your effect sounding good. I want to show you guys another example where one effect is placed too loud in the song to the point where you can't even hear that there's a crash in there. Okay, so again, we do the same thing and we reach this value here. And notice that as I lower the exhaust, this crash starts to appear out of nowhere. So now the next question I need to ask you, and the next mistake I see myself doing a lot, is the overusage of effects. For some reason, whenever I work with people, they stack their effects like Oprah, just giving you like, here you go, here you go. And in my head, I'm like, what are you trying to do? Oh yeah, the crash is too short. Then don't use a crash then. Use something that's longer. So if I get rid of this exhaust, the question is, do I need it? Verse. This mistake comes from the idea that you can't commit. You have an issue with committing to a sample, to an individual. But the beautiful thing about committing to that crash is that when you give it all the attention, it's all you need, and the track sounds three-dimensional, versus when you crowd too many effects and you don't commit and you don't know what you want. Look at that. Look at that. Beautiful. Sidechain latency. You're going to run into latency as you start to put the fancy plugins. And these fancy plugins create latency because they're trying to achieve something. For instance, they might be like linear phase EQs where, it's an EQ that doesn't really alter phase around a cut. But in order to run them, you have to take on latency. Now, watch as I go into linear phase. Now, this is an extreme example, of course, but this does happen. Let's see how the bass shifts. Now, watch as I sidechain this. The thing you have to do is put the LFO in front of the third-party bougie fancy plugins. Sometimes you can utilize the offset, the LFO tool here. What this does is it shifts it. So you're letting LFO tool know, hey, there's latency. For example, here. So I can move it until it's right where it needs to be. And then we clamp down like a pro. Sloppy reverbs and delays. That's one of the biggest culprits of an amateur mix, is when the reverb sounds really just untamed. There are always exceptions, so I know this is like a good foundation formula for like the David Guetta Future Rave reverb and the W&W one. However, for majority of people that aren't making those kind of genres, this is too much. The only time you would use a long reverb is if you had a sound that played maybe once and you wanted that sound to linger a little longer, and also the track wasn't too crowded, it wasn't too full. Bounce down your reverb and delays. Check this out. We could do some really cool stuff here. Like we could do this. And then it gets rid of it instantly. So this is one way you can control your reverbs. Again, with reverbs, if you must have something set in stone, no more than 2.5 seconds of decay time, and keep it low. The reason is a long reverb doesn't make sense when the sound is hitting constantly, because the sound will be activating reverb every single time, and that reverb's lasting 8 seconds. 8 seconds is about from here to here. In fact, no, it's from here to here. Who the hell needs that kind of reverb, bruh? And then there are other tricks too that you can watch, like the cashmere reverb ducking effect, where the reverb, for example, I can send it to a return track, and then I could sidechain this with a compressor. Let me just sidechain it to the lead itself. I'll do it here. Now you could do this. And I think that's cool. But it shouldn't be an excuse to allow you to like use crappy reverb from the get-go, you know, like, because this still sounds amateurish when done wrong. Also make sure you're in peak mode. Imagine that going off. Eventually the lead's going to stop playing. You're going to have a huge amount of reverb coming at you. Bass dynamics. Now this is a good example for this track here. This is a track I'm going to trash, but one of the things that I was hearing was the bass is not optimized for the idea, the MIDI that I have created for it. And I'm going to show you guys one of the things that I get paid big money to teach people. We can first open up the filter, get rid of the filter. And I want to make this groove in its rawest form. Huh? Let's get rid of the sidechain. So the way I do that is with the envelope one, which is routed to the amp envelope, the volume. You want to find that for any synth you're using, the amp envelope. From there, lower down the sustain. And you're going to play with this decay. To where, like, it makes you dance. You feel the groove. You feel the, yes, you know, like Isla Bonita vibes. Let's say there. Now you bring up the sustain. Now this is the hard part, because the sustain can make or break it. You want enough sustain so that when the note is done with the decay phase, going from the highest volume down to that sustain, and you're holding out there, and again, you can look at your MIDI to see if there's any sections where you're holding out. You're going to have power. This is another way to add shape. You can see here, I'm going to lower that sustain. And I could easily grab envelope one, hold Alt, drag it across. Boom. Lower it down. Hey. And now we're going to increase the decay a bit. Now that doesn't sound right to me, so we're going to go low 24. And now it still sounds like shit because of the sustain. This is one of the concepts that when I teach big, small artists, their eyes light up. And I always tell them, yeah, mixing engineers, they're fugazi, you know, because if you can fix it at the source, we don't need them. Just kidding, guys. I know, I love mixing as well, and there's tricks for that too. But if you can fix it at the source, this ties in with one of the earlier things we talked about, which is not producing with intention to commit. Feel the groove, and then from there, just make sure that you have enough power and you're not too staccato, pizzicato. You're going to scare people that way, and you'll be good to go. Overcrowding due to insecurities. Overcrowding is a big one. It usually happens because you don't know what you want from your song. You don't have a clear destination. You're just kind of throwing shit until something sticks. And I think that's a good strategy, but eventually if you want a happy face, you're going to have to wipe the shit so that the last remaining shit forms a happy face. Same thing in music. A lot of the sounds are fighting with each other for stardom, for space. So the way I see myself is like a dog owner. I have to take order. I need to observe the idea. I'm like, okay, I like what I hear, but it's way too busy. Okay, so the ARP, it's something that needs to be constantly there. I know that. So that's staying. So now, you know, too much going on. One of my closest friends preached knowledge once to me, but it's an aha moment. I had this track and he was like, maybe you're just trying to do too much at once. I don't know, that quote is amazing because it is true. At this exact moment, we have a fucking chord stab, another chord stab. We have a damn ARP being brought in. We have rides being brought in. We have a crash. And then we have a vocal that's ending. So you get what I'm saying? It's like, what? Too much. So we can subtract. This doesn't need to be there, so let's get rid of it. And now let's see how it sounds. Okay. Oh, just got cluttered again, right? What can I remove? Well, I can remove the ARP. Does that sound good? Meh. Can we remove this? Let's see. And eventually you make way for all these little things that are going to happen and see how it sounds. Woo!
I never saw the stars falling like your tears.
Don't look at me, Craig! Getting too ahead of myself is one of the biggest mistakes I make to this day when it comes to music production. And one of the biggest mistakes I make is working into my drum processing chain. And this is a huge mistake because let's say that I decide to set up my bus compressor for the drums, right? Look at this. And let's say I put it here. Ooh, that makes the drum sound good though. But here's the issue with this. Assuming that I set up, then the next issue is that if I decide to change the volume of the clap or the open at or something, the compressor isn't the way I set it up anymore because it's expecting a volume that I set up before, and now as I start to rework stuff, the volume's changing, so now the compressor isn't reacting to the way that I set it up. So this is what I mean about getting ahead of myself. The worst thing that has happened to me in a song is me running the capitator and then making something louder in the mix because it was too quiet. Capitator going more crazy. And I didn't realize it until eventually I was like, why do my drums sound so fucking harsh? And then I'm like, ugh. So this is one of the things that I find to this day that just makes me sound very newbie, and it's a waste of time. This is why having your sounds sound 80% of the way there is such a good philosophy, because you don't feel the need to saturate or compress or do any of this stuff until later on. And then all of this stuff is just going to amount to that last 15%, which shouldn't matter at that point. Yeah, I'll get you to that next level. So being all over the place and getting ahead of myself, like, oh, this kind of sounds good, let's put a master. Oh, this kind of sounds good, let's fucking saturate the shit out of the drums. One of the worst things I do to this day, and I'm finding myself slowly gravitating away from mixing as I produce. And I should say more like group mixing, where like I have a group like this and I have a bunch of drums in there because there's just too much to account for. These have been some of the mistakes I make to this day that make me sound like a noob, and hopefully the solutions will help you, will aid you in your music production journey. If you have done these, let me know. Let's relate. If you haven't, then fucking awesome. And if you just started producing, make sure you avoid these pitfalls. Hopefully I showed you guys a good example of why it's bad to fall into them, and hopefully you can do the opposite. That will make you sound better, make you sound more professional, which will bring me meaning to my life because you sound good. Check this video out on arrangements, simple hacks that you can use to make your arrangement more exciting, because arrangement is storytelling. And if you tell your story in a boring way, it's a boring song. But if you can tell it in a unique, exciting way, well, now we're talking.